Ms. Kuik Shiao Yin.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin, please let me state my professional interests up front. For the last 16 years, I have been part of the teaching and learning ecosystem in Singapore. I'm a co-founder of a purpose-driven tuition center. I'm a publisher of current affairs magazines sold directly to schools. I'm also a coach and trainer of working professionals, helping them develop the social and emotional skills they need to become better architects for cultural change. So my clients have included principals, vice principals, teachers, and administrators. My interest in education began when I was 25. I had started an experimental tuition group with my friends because we were curious about two questions. The first was, why are so many young Singaporeans graduating out of our local education system, number one, uncertain about who they are, and number two, indifferent to bigger problems in Singapore and the world? And the second question was, what can we do about it? We experimented with general paper tuition as a strategic medium to help 18-year-olds consider their individual and collective responsibilities. And we found that if you help kids get curious about who they are and what they care about, they get naturally a lot more curious about how their individual choices connect with broader systemic issues. So we started off with 20 kids from neighborhood junior colleges, but by the end of that same year, the group ballooned into 100 kids, and we realized we should officially register as a private tuition center. So we applied to the Registry of Business and called ourselves School of Thought, and soon after, an RCB officer called me back to tell us our name could not be approved. And I asked him what was wrong with the name School of Thought, and for as long as I teach, I don't think I will forget what he said. His response, without any irony, was this: what do schools have to do with thinking? School of Math, I understand. School of English, I understand. But thought? How do schools teach thinking? He did not sound uneducated or unwilling, just genuinely perplexed. And I remember having a very surreal one-hour-long conversation with this government officer about why schools had a lot to do with thinking, and that the name was a pun, and still he would not be moved. And finally I asked, what if we just call ourselves School of Thought Learning Center? And he said, oh yes, with great relief. That's fine, because then it's just a name and not an intention. I do not take that very odd exchange as representative of the whole of government. That is just one bureaucrat's worldview. And also 16 years have passed, and times and attitudes have evolved since then, and I am more optimistic that I would not get that same response today. Still, I will not brush his remark off as an aberration, because his remark to me is a signpost that there could be many more individuals out there who have taught an incomplete or mistaken lesson about the purpose of education, and that gap in their learning does have consequences on us all on a systemic level. In the last few years, I've been getting more inquiries for training from healthcare organizations, and when we asked them why there was a surge of interest in social and emotional development from their sector, they shared with us their challenges in teaching some of their staff to see their patients as not just diseases to treat, but people to care for. One medical team shared with us their conviction to put more emphasis on empathy in their curriculum came after a disillusioned medical student revealed to them that she was quitting the profession after she witnessed two surgeons she was supposed to be learning from execute a surgical procedure with flawless expertise while simultaneously making the most vile and derogatory comments about the unconscious patient. And though the two surgeons had saved the patient in body, they had killed that young doctor in spirit. Those kind of stories make me reflect. When did a bureaucrat learn that schools had nothing to do with thinking? And when did those surgeons learn that their medical education had nothing to do with feeling? Did they learn it from their parents, the teachers, or society? And barring how great their results were in the exam hall, are we satisfied with these results of their education in real life? The kids we teach today grow up. The first 18-year-olds I thought are 34 now, and some of them probably work for you. Our kids became our bureaucrats deciding what to approve or not approve. They become our doctors and bean counters deciding who's worth saving and who's not worth saving. They become our customers and entrepreneurs deciding what money can buy and what money should never ever buy. They become our voters and politicians deciding who rules and who should be ruled. So the future of our country is already being written. Can all win. For our country can only go as far as our classrooms are willing and able to go, so we need to work together on this. I thank my fellow parliamentarian Rahayu for the amendments she has introduced, so I will focus on 3 of her amendments and make recommendations along those lines. Her first amendment asks that we build an education system that gives each student the best possible support. And when I talk to educators, 3 big things recur on their wish list of what best possible support could look like. more time to focus on teaching and learning, reduction in class sizes, and abolishing the high-stakes exams. All teachers who take their work seriously will tell you that school calendars are perpetually overstuffed, and it is a constant struggle to claw back time to just focus on teaching. Teachers do appreciate the need to expand their work scope beyond teaching to broaden their skill sets. However, there is a breaking point when they start to question how much time in their job is spent on mastering their craft versus managing projects, marking, doing administrative work, running CCAs, and organizing events. Many educators actually express some guilt that they spend far more time teaching and managing other people's children versus spending time on their own kids at home. And in fact, some educators express double guilt for sending their own kids to private tuition because they have no time or energy left for their own kids of what is significant. Part of the reason why teachers feel so strapped for time is the number of learners we expect them to give individual attention to. Right now, our primary and secondary schools still average at 33 to 34 students a class. Primary 1 and 2 averages at 29 pupils, which is still way above the average OECD primary and secondary class sizes at 21 and 24. And I know MOE has argued that teacher quality matters more than class size, but the sheer volume of work to be done with such large numbers of students will constrain even the most talented teacher. Adjunct Professor S. Gopinathan at the LKY School of Public Policy and former Dean of NIE School of Education said in an interview with the Straits Times that even the best trained teacher will find it difficult coping with a class of 40 students in an era where we want children to be more inquisitive, explain their insights, and have more applied learning. And those are more complex processes compared to the direct transmissive teaching of personal convictions, but it does come at personal cost to their own mental, physical, and emotional well-being. So with declining birth rates and schools closing, we can take the opportunity to adjust our class sizes to a more sustainable number to address some of our teachers' long-standing concerns. I see that we currently have smaller size classes at the JC, tertiary, and university levels, but not at primary and secondary school level. And I suggest that we explore our assumption that the tertiary level students need more individualized attention than younger students. If education is about helping learners gain in confidence and ability to manage and own their own learning process, then shouldn't the smallest classes and the greatest availability of teacher support be with the youngest children? An 18-year-old should be sufficiently independent as a learner and more capable of taking care of his own learning. And a 7-year-old learner who's just beginning to learn needs a lot more individual scaffolding and personal more about subject downloading than what I said is irrelevant. Some of us might say that the average 18-year-old in our current system might still be exhibiting signs of great dependency on his teacher for instructions and still asking people to spot questions and compile model essays on his behalf. And in fact, you could observe that some of our working adults still display similar learning habits and over-dependency on authority to spoon-feed solutions. If so, then this is feedback that we're still not doing enough cognitive apprenticeship. So to me, the class size issue is a bit linked to the intentions of our education system. Is it for helping learners get progressively independent and confident in their thinking? If so, primary school class sizes need to get much smaller to help teachers work with their learners' high dependency. Is it for helping learners just swallow large amounts of information? Then if so, then I can understand why huge class sizes are still tolerable, because it's a bit like raising battery hens. You cram a lot of them in one room because you feed them all the same thing anyway. But of course, my hope and personal bias is that we go for smaller classes. Concerns about costs are real, so why not take up NCMP Leon Pereira's suggestion in 2017 that the MOE consider conducting a small trial to find out if reduced sizes could improve students' results. I support that request and agree with Professor Gopinathan's opinion that more work can be done to look at the pros and cons of reducing class sizes before dismissing the idea. Without a local knowledge base, we can't say it doesn't make a difference based on international research. Which brings me to the high-stakes exam issue. A bewildered parent explained it to me this way. There are 10 weeks in a school term. The teacher typically takes week 1 to do admin and settle the kids in. And then week 6 to 10 is all about exam prep and taking the exam, which means if a teacher wants to do anything interesting, he only has 4 weeks in a term. So 40% of the school term is taken up by exam prep. Where does the teacher have the time to go find out what's happening in the world or in different industries? When that same parent talked to his child's teacher that he would rather the school not focus so much on exam prep, the teacher told him, it's not that I don't want to do all the interesting stuff. I want. But if my students don't do well at exams, it affects my appraisal and it affects my bonus. I don't have a choice. So MOE has been plagued for years by public outcry about excessive levels of stress in the system. And while many stakeholders want the education system to change, many are still looking at other stakeholders to change first. So it feels like everyone's a bit stuck on a psychological impasse. And I have been of two minds with the issue of abolishing PSLE. It is hardly a silver bullet solution, and abolishing it will definitely generate many new problems and fail to resolve some old ones. And it will force many other policies to change together with it. However, I also see that the ground does not seem sufficiently convinced so far by the little tweaks being made to PSLE grades. And we know this because they're not changing their behavior in any significant way. Mothers are still quitting their jobs to prepare their kids for PSLE, and the billion-dollar tuition industry is still not pivoting their business models to help kids grow in character rather than grades anytime soon. They are quite confident that they know their customer is not going to shift. The arms race kiasu culture seems to be eating all our strategies for breakfast. So I do wonder whether abolishing PSLE could be a psychological Gordian knot that needs to be cut. I can understand the government's resistance to abolishing PSLE because to take on the barrage of trouble involved, the win must be significant and something the majority of the electorate must show that it is willing to support. Because abolishing the PSLE will set off a chain reaction of very uncomfortable changes. Without PSLE, there might be much less reason to stream in primary school or upon entering secondary school. Primary school teachers will be challenged up their game and compelled to design and deliver a curriculum that is no longer about prepping kids for a standardized exam. And MOE would have to devise a whole new way to assess the quality of teaching in primary schools without data from PSLE results. And abolishing the PSLE also opens up the question of how then should we level the playing field for secondary schools? Do we want to ensure all secondary schools are funded, resourced, and governed the same way by MOE? If so, then we will have to remove all kinds of admissions, such as the DSA, and even end the special status of schools, some schools. And this would be a very difficult change for some elite schools to swallow because nobody wants to give up their elite identity. So if we do abolish PSLE someday, these teething issues would take probably a painful decade to iron out. But once a steady state is reached, there would be much less difficulties. So the question for us today, the government and the people, is more about whether that steady state of greater inclusivity for all learners represents a future we think is worth suffering for. So I do not think it's an easy path at all. I don't have an answer about whether we should or should not abolish the PSLE, because I recognize it takes a lot of political risk to make that change. So this is all easy for me to say because I'm not a politician and I'm just speaking as a parent, and this particular parent's naive hope is that we will someday dismantle the PSLE, because I would rather give more time and space for our teachers to develop our children's thinking without fear of messing up a high-stakes exam. And moreover, I think a 16-year-old is far more cognitively prepared to deal with the psychological impact of a high-stakes exam than a 12-year-old. And this also gives us more breathing room for primary schoolers, for lower-income families to catch up. The second amendment Rahayu raised is about recognizing the ability and talent of every student and offering developmental paths which are unique to them. When I talked to parents, two things were brought up. The first is on whether we can reimagine our report cards. I know we have already shifted our report cards from just listing grades and share more on their personal development, but I still think they don't present a rich enough picture of the unique journey of progression that every student takes. So right now, the burden of assessment is placed on teachers alone. But what if students and parents help to co-create the report book? Many preschools today actually don't use report cards, and they show parents a well-curated achievement file instead. The file contains very rich visual artifacts like photos of key moments or outstanding pieces of work that help everyone appreciate how far their child has come. And there's also a section in the achievement file where teachers ask parents on the spot to not only put in the parents' assessment of the achievements they've seen in their own child at home, they're even asked very subtly to assess what they have done for their own child. In my recent meeting at my daughter's preschool, I had to fill in how often we were reading to her, talking to her, and showing her new places in Singapore. And that message sent by the achievement file was compassionate but very clear. I, the parent, was part of the process of my child's growth. This co-created achievement file, while much more costly in investment of time, can change the relationship between parents and teachers from an adversarial, consumeristic one to a collaborative and empathetic one. The second thing that parents raised was how principals were rotated in 5 to 6 year cycles, preventing neighborhood schools from deepening their commitment to a unique set of strengths and interests. They felt that sometimes new principals would try too hard to establish their own flavor and uproot directions set in place by the previous principal. This constant upheaval in direction not only prevented a strong identity and culture from forming, but it broke trust with teachers and disheartened parents who believed in the previous vision. So culture and identity is not built overnight. It takes 10 to 20 years. If more principals were allowed to commit 2 cycles to building culture, schools would have a stronger foundation to design those alternative development paths that are wholly unique to the school and suited to particular students' interests. The third amendment asks us to enable Singaporeans to improve our lives and pay special attention to the kids from vulnerable families. And in this, I want to raise our attention to an especially vulnerable niche group of kids, those who grow up under the care of single migrant mothers. This is a group that was highlighted to me by Readable, which is a wonderful ground-up movement of young professionals who partner lower-income families to close the literacy gap. So for the last 4 years, they've been running literacy classes in Jalan Kukoh, not just for the kids, but for the mothers as well. These kids are 3 to 14 years old. They do not speak English as a first language at home. Many still can't name all the letters of the alphabet. And this means that without any early intervention, many of the kids would begin primary 1 with no or little reading skills, and this puts them way behind the starting line. So research very clearly shows that early intervention in the lives of children from low SES households would reduce the learning gap significantly in the following years of their lives. And all the kids who started attending these readables classes regularly before the age of 6 actually started reading at primary 1 or above grade level. In fact, some of the kids who attend their preschool class currently read better than children who join them at primary school age. So there is a trickle-down effect as well. As the kids grow in confidence, they started to influence their siblings to read. So I hope the government can partner with community groups to intervene as early as possible in the literacy gap. For instance, can the National Library help place a personalized mini library in every low-income household with a child that requests to have one? Every parent in this room knows there's a huge difference when children grow up in a literacy-rich environment. That's why we buy books for our kids, though we have access to public libraries. So if we allow these kids to initiate a request for their own mini library and own their own customized cargo of books, they might be far more likely to see books as part of their life. And if the MDA can consider working with these successful ground-up literacy movements to co-create a solution using media or tech that could help sustain the impact, that would be great, because kids need plenty of repetition, and audio-visual recordings of these books for them to play back on their own time might prove really helpful. Second, can the government provide better support in housing, education and employment for migrant mothers who are struggling to improve the lives of their Singaporean children? A stable home environment and literacy-related support for these parents would help the child's educational progress, and more deliberate and preemptive outreach from the government to help these migrant mothers care for their Singaporean child in the short run could stave off far more expensive problems in the long run. Community groups like Readable working directly with such migrant mothers hope for much greater dialogue on how they can partner the state to help more migrant mothers and their Singaporean children progress education in the education aspect. So I would like to conclude by affirming that despite the issues I brought up, I have seen greatness in our system, and that there are lots of innovations and innovators already waiting to be tapped if we so choose to see them, learn them, and partner in supporting them. And there is, in fact, a school in Singapore that manifests so many of the things I talked about in this speech. Character education there makes up 50% of its first 2 years of curriculum and is a major part of the way they assess student development. The kids there are focused on discovering their values and what work they would like to do, and not just mug it for an exam. The content, the pedagogy, the assessments are learner-centric. There's 70% experiential learning. By the end of the program, they would have all gone for an 8-week industry attachment. And yes, they have achievement records, not report cards, and their kids are so proud to show them to their parents. And yes, there are protected times there for educators to just reflect and learn. And yes, this is a school that gives support to its neighborhood community and receives a lot of support back from its community. And no, this is not a school for the elite. It's just the opposite. It is a school designed to support kids who failed PSLE 2 or 3 times, as well as those who dropped out of the system. This school is Northlight, and it was an idea floated in 1997 and dismissed as before its time, and it was made real only in 2005 when Mr. Lim Chuan Po, a perm sec at MOE, had the curiosity to find an answer to one student's frustration about why he had to repeat PSLE so many times. And that perm sec's leap of faith allowed more leaders and purpose-driven principals and teachers to come and put their own skin in the game, and it was all of them combined together, their collective courage to live out the highest ideals of education that made Northlight happen. So Northlight is a school that makes me damn proud to be Singaporean. Honestly, I would gladly send my own child there. Northlight's model contains so many wisdoms and insights that mainstream schools can learn from, and it is a beautiful symbol of what is possible if we care enough to make things happen, not just for ourselves, but for others who we do not want to leave behind. Thank you.